back to the Down to the Wire podcast, episode 31. We are coming off the back of an awful lot of football this week because we're in the middle of the Euros. But we're going to do a Formula 1 podcast. Jack, how you doing?
I'm good. It's been a good week. I haven't had anything to do but watch football. My dark horse of Ukraine, albeit didn't really impress against North Macedonia, did put up a good showing against the Netherlands. So I was glad about that. And Italy are doing pretty well, who are my favourites. So far, and my fantasy team for the Euros is doing phenomenally well. So I'm feeling good after this week, if I'm honest. How about you?
Yeah, good, mate. I guess the Welsh part of me is very, very happy. Well, I say the Welsh part of me, I'm fully Welsh. So all of me is very happy with how Wales have been performing. Solid performance against Switzerland, and then we just kind of let loose a little bit against Turkey. So it's all looking good now. But yeah, and obviously never a bad thing to have a lot of football all in 1 week, is it? So yeah, doing good. But as I said, we're going to be talking about the Formula 1 because we did a pre-tournament podcast in relation to the Euros last week. If you haven't had a listen, go and have a listen to that. We did like a rundown of all of the groups. I think I'm right in saying we'll be doing another one at some point. Kind of after the groups are finished, kind of pre-knockout stages.
Yes, it should be recorded this Thursday and hopefully out to you as soon as possible.
Yeah. So just keep an eye out for that if you're interested in the football. But for now, we're going to be sticking with Formula 1 and we're talking France. We're on a circuit as opposed to a street circuit, which is quite nice after back-to-back races on in Monaco and Baku, which are both street circuits. How are you feeling about that change?
Going from street back to the old classic
Yes.
on a circuit. I'll be honest, I am looking forward to it. As much as I enjoy a street circuit, I mean, I don't think anybody really enjoys Monaco, but as much as I enjoy a street circuit as in Azerbaijan, because I like the punishing element of drivers, you know what I mean? You can't just get away with going wide all the time and getting penalties like some drivers do on these sorts of circuits, as we say. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it because also it's an opportunity to see the cars really let loose again because it's no longer all about driver skill and how you negotiate corners to not bump your car. It's now just let the tanks loose and absolutely hammer it on some of these straights which feed into sweeping bends, and it's like, who can grip on for dear life? It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I mean, particularly, as you've said as well, at Monaco, you don't get a lot of overtaking, do you? And hopefully now that we're on a circuit, more overtakes, which is always nice in a competitive motorsport. Yeah, no, it should be good. And I guess it's kind of one extreme to the other, isn't it? You've gone from kind of... Well, I say one extreme, as in Baku is quite a fast circuit, but as in you've gone from, street circuits, which are, compared to normal circuits, fairly narrow, to the circuit that they use for the French Grand Prix, which is probably the most open circuit on the calendar, I would say, in terms of runoff, etc., etc.
It's like an airfield, isn't it?
I think I'm right in say again.
It's like an airfield how wide it is.
Yeah, basically. I read something yesterday, like the amount of different... Because obviously it's not just the one circuit configuration there. They have lots of like circuits within a circuit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
A little bit like Abu Dhabi, I guess. But like they said, the number of like different configurations you can have is like in the hundreds, apparently. Which I thought was mental. But obviously, for this season, for the Formula 1, it's the same as what it always has been for the Formula 1.
Classic.
Yeah. So, as you said, very fast circuit, lots of high-speed corners, lots of straights as well, big overtaking opportunities there with the DRS sections. Well, I say sections. You've got the one kind of before... Well, you've got the one on the home straight, haven't you? That's one DRS zone. And then you've got another one sort of midway towards the end of the sector, etc. It's kind of in the middle of sector 2.
Yep.
So interesting circuit. And I don't know about you, but this has always been one of those circuits where I'm kind of a little bit indifferent to what the circuit is, but I don't know, perhaps because we've had the two street circuits in a row, I'm perhaps a little bit more excited than I have been in the past.
I get what you mean. It's also been a week's break in between, hasn't it? Or maybe even 2 weeks since Azerbaijan. I can't remember, but it feels a lifetime ago since Hamilton.
Yeah, it is 2 weeks. Yeah.
Since Hamilton pressed the magic button, it does seem a while. Yeah, I do like this circuit in a way. I like that there's two DRS zones. I think it just means more overtaking, and I think the more overtaking, the more enjoyable it is to watch. Particularly Sector 2, well, it's basically two back-to-back straights with a small mini chicane in the middle of it, but we're going to see some properly good overtaking. I mean, we've seen Verstappen sort of maybe cut up Hamilton or properly race him aggressively into some of the turn ones this season where they've been, at the end of straights, sharp turn. I feel like we're going to see that, maybe not at turn 1, but at turn 8 where it is the end of that first DRS zone straight. And I could see Verstappen well and truly cutting up Hamilton again if he's not ahead, or anybody for that matter. I think it's a good spot to dive bomb safely in a sense.
A good spot to dive bomb like that. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the DRS it plays a massive part on the circuit just because the straights are so long, and obviously you get the slipstream as well.
Absolutely.
And
if anything, you go on about the slipstreams. Slipstreams, that's probably right. But this circuit is quite exposed, so I feel like the being in behind somebody, as in the slipstream, is going to be quite a big differential on this circuit compared to a circuit like in the street circuits where it's maybe the fact that you have got all the high-rise buildings quite next to each other, the wind maybe channels a little bit and maybe there's a bit more wind, but by and large I think these open circuits are the ones where the wind's going to play a little bit more havoc, where you get a tailwind rather than it all being headwind. Yeah,
well, like we saw it at Portimao, didn't we? The Red Bulls seemed to struggle with it most probably, but there were a few turns where they'd kind of be wobbling around a little bit. And I think Mercedes struggled in Bahrain, and like you said, because of the street circuits, they're kind of enclosed. You don't necessarily have that factor as much. But the circuit in France is just so open. Yeah. It's crazy. So yeah, who knows? I mean, I guess we haven't got a lot of elevation change in France.
There's no undulations.
It's all kind of on the same level. No undulations. No undulations, correct. There are no undulations. So yeah, perhaps it won't be as big a factor, but just the fact that it's so open. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of track limits. I know we're going to get onto that in a little bit, but I guess that's kind of been one of the main talking points of the season so far, isn't it? We had carnage in Bahrain with Hamilton going over, and then Red Bull saying, "Oh well, if he's going to do it, we're going to do it." And then at Imola, Norris qualified second, and then had his time deleted because he'd run wide. But I mean, obviously, there's an element to which the type of circuit will impact the likelihood that somebody's going to push it to the limit, and because the runoffs are so enormous at this circuit, as in, I guess there is every opportunity that the drivers can take. They're going to try and push the limit, I think.
Yeah.
Just because there's so much runoff, as in like
the risk reward.
For example, exactly at Baku, if they're pushing it to the limit, as we saw at turn 15, I think it was, you push it to the limit, you hit the wall, and you're out. Whereas at this circuit, you push it to the absolute limit, and then you just
get a little tailing
drive wide and go, and you go again next lap. So it'll be interesting to see how that all pans out.
Well, to sort of curb those who like to cut the corners, Hamilton.
Good pun there.
They have implemented these small little yellow. Well, I say small little yellow bumps. I mean, we are recording this after P1 has taken place, and Bottas is already. Well, he went wide at turn 2, and to be fair, that's one of the areas where you're going to see the most change. Well, one of the biggest changes in wind direction in a sense, because you're going from straight to a small but fast bend back onto another straight in a sense. So you're carrying the speed. And we've seen, Sainz did it as well in P1 as Bottas, and both of them went over these curbs which they've implemented at turn 2. Mercedes complained to the FIA already, saying that the damage that you take for going wide at what is relatively, I mean, you can say you gain time because it is a spot where if you go particularly wide you can carry a lot more speed, but they think the aggressiveness of these curbs is in a sense not equitable to how much time you would be gaining, because they're saying the damage which is caused to Bottas's car is in the hundreds of thousands, because it was a proper, it was almost like rally car how much his car was going up and down. And Sainz span and then went over them like backwards almost, and you could see his car go a little airborne for a moment, and it was like, oh, there's some pretty serious curbs they've put down. And do you really think curbs? Well, I know, like we were saying about Azerbaijan, and it was like it's quite punishing if a driver makes the wrong move in a sense, and there's no forgiving element to that circuit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You go wide, you're not in the race anymore. But do you think really big curbs are the way to go about it? When, I mean, just cancelling lap times. I mean, especially in P1, where in a sense it's a getting to know you session for a lot of the drivers. I mean, you think of guys like Tsunoda, Schumacher, and Mazepin.
Mazepin.
Yeah. He's Mazepin now after beating Hamilton.
Mazepin. Oh my goodness.
There's so many ways you could spin that name. But
let's not make that a thing.
But yeah, after you see those guys, and this is their first time, and it's like, well, baptism of fire here. You go wide at that circuit.
Yeah.
You're doing a lot of damage to your car. So, I'll be honest. I'd much prefer, particularly in P1. Not, you know what I mean? No one's really gaining anything. You're just still learning the track. But even when you're going into qualifying and even the race, it's like, I don't feel like you need big curbs to damage cars to deter people from doing it. Just be stricter on the rules. Say you've gone too wide, you're going to get a penalty.
I mean, I can kind of see why they've gone down this route, because I think having a deterrent there, it forces the drivers to, rather than trying to like push the limit every time, they have really got to think, right, if I run wide, this could damage my car now. So I as in it, from that purely basic perspective, I guess it forces drivers to stay within the limits. I mean, your argument to that could be, well, because did you say that Sainz span out?
Sainz span at turn 1, so the wind took him, rather than Bottas, who negotiated it wrong and
just
went
ran
over
wide,
it.
Yeah.
Sainz physically had spun beforehand, then as he was sort of spinning and going backwards, he went over those curbs, which made him throw up in the air almost.
Yeah, I mean, that's when it's a bit of a tricky one then, isn't it? Because, like Sainz clearly there hasn't tried to exceed track limits in order to gain an advantage. He's just spun. And, you could probably argue the same for Bottas. I've not seen it, but, perhaps he just lost the rear end and he's had to correct, and as a result, he's gone over the curbs.
And that's the thing, it's not a forgiving circuit for the wind, because, I mean, also Vettel span, Schumacher span, people are spinning a lot. So the fact that you can spin and then, just because there's yellow curbs on the circuit, all of a sudden completely shred the bottom of your car, it's like, doesn't seem equitable.
I mean, I guess, from the FIA's perspective, though, they probably don't want to have to be in a scenario where they're having to watch 24/7, because a lot happens in a race. There's a lot going on. They probably don't want to be having to sit and watch like every single corner. Are they exceeding? Are they exceeding? Are they exceeding? So
they put monitors at different parts of the track. Like, you know what I mean? You think the grid positions at the beginning of the race, they've got monitors, so it is black and white. You have started too early. You are too far forward. You know what I mean? They can work that stuff out. I feel like with all the money that's in Formula One, they could put little sort of sensors on cars that, in a sense, you go, these 4 corners are all exceeded at that point. It will flag it up, because that way, then, you know what I mean? I feel like there's ways, in a sense. I feel like it's the FIA almost being lazy, in a sense, not finding an alternative to just putting down big markers. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of agree with that, but then the issue you're going to have then is that the drivers themselves aren't going to know whether they've exceeded the track limits, because it's a monitor or an invisible thing. Like, let's be fair, as soon as you go over a bump, you probably know about it.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's like a monitor on the track itself, I guess it swings and roundabouts. I'd probably agree with you. I was playing devil's advocate earlier. I'd probably agree with you that I would just turn around and say the FIA just need to watch what's happening rather than putting massive speed bumps there. And I guess this is going back to what we said before, is in like consistency across the season, is in like, they go to some circuits and they do changes in practice relative to the race, and then you've got other ones which are like super strict, like they were in Imola. Then you go here and they're like, oh, well, we're going to put speed bumps in this one. It's like, well, you got to have a... Why is there so much variation between the tactics they use across the calendar? And I mean, I guess the argument would be is because the circuits are changing so much. But yeah, I mean, if it's to the point where it's significantly damaging the car every time it goes over it, then, but then I guess, again, you could also argue the other way. If it was a circuit which had like grass or gravel, if you plant your car in that area on grass or gravel, you're possibly spinning out, or you're just getting bogged down in gravel. So,
but it's not damaging the car in that scenario, which is the big thing. I feel like a lot of teams could live with a one-place grid penalty, 3-second time penalty for the race, or 5 seconds. You know what I mean? You can live with that, but particularly when you're thinking of the smaller manufacturers, well, I don't know if you can call them manufacturers that don't make the engine, but teams like Haas, Alfa Romeo, you could say Williams to an extent, they haven't got an enormous budget. So it's like doing these sorts of mass damage to cars just to teach the drivers how to drive properly. Or sometimes it's even the cars not acting as they want to, and it's like, surely save them a few bob. I'm sure they'll take the grid place penalty over that, because, I mean, especially now that we're talking about shorter sessions, particularly for practice, it's like drivers don't have as much time to get on the track if you're all of a sudden damaging your car. On what I mean, Bottas's thing was the first lap he went out and I think Schumacher spun within the first 2 minutes, and it's like, well, if that does some irreparable damage, that's one of his 3 sessions gone. It's like, well, you know what I mean. Particularly when you're talking about how small time they have now, damage plays a much bigger part in the fact that when you have to fix particularly minor things, it will still take a big chunk of your available time. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends what approach they want to take, because I guess there's an argument that the current setup is prevention, isn't it? Because now, any driver that's going through there is thinking, rather than, right, I need to be on the limit, needs to be thinking, right, I need to not be as brave through this corner, and just kind of make sure I don't go on the bumpy speed bumps, but the Verstoppers, as they were once called. But yeah, no, I would probably agree with what you're saying there, as in, it seems a little bit excessive, particularly as well, like you said, if there are windy conditions, that's probably one of the areas where you're going to, be a bit more wobbly, and if it's a case that if you make a mistake there, it's costing you a significant amount of damage and therefore a significant amount of money, it doesn't seem particularly practical.
I just thought in my head, I'm not opposed to speed bumps on the inside of corners. But I think on corner exits, I think that's where you don't need them. I understand that's... Because in a sense, on the inside of corners, that's where teams are cutting corners. And it's like, well, in those situations, it's clear as day, in a sense. You can't cut a corner, in a sense, because of something going wrong. That's you taking a liberty. But on corner exit, that's where you can lose the car. That's where another car might be beside you and you're trying to get out of the way. It feels... I just feel like for corner exits they probably shouldn't be, but I can almost understand them for insides. I mean, particularly when you think, was it when Verstappen overtook Kimi Räikkönen on the last lap? Was that in USA?
Yeah.
I can't. And that one he did it on the inside, and that very much was like, okay, well, if you're just doing sensors on those, you're never going to be 100% over it in a sense, but you. Because you're on the convenient side of it, you can always sort of just about keep a tyre on. So I can understand it maybe putting it there to say, don't go cutting the corners because we haven't got sensors which adequately can stop that. But corner exits, I still don't understand why you've got enormous curbs.
Well, I mean, the thing is that on a track like... I think it depends on the track, doesn't it? Like this circuit, if you can carry a lot more speed through a longer route, if that makes sense, then that's going to save you time, isn't it? So that's why they probably put it on the outside of corners, because basically if you go through turn 1 and then run wide through turn 2, you can probably line yourself up for turn 3 a lot better than if you stay to the limit itself. But yeah, ultimately, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it in this scenario. I think the argument in this case would probably be, well, is it a little bit excessive? Possibly. Will it prevent other drivers from doing it now? Almost certainly. Then you could possibly argue that it has been, okay, it's been costly for a couple, but on the whole now, for the race weekend, it could be effective. It could be effective, but I think I agree with you. It's a little bit excessive.
Cool.
Do they have them on? Do they have them on any of the other corners out of interest?
On this circuit, yes,
Yeah.
they got them quite often around the circuit. To us, on most corners, but it's only particularly turn 2 was a big one because that's where it's such a sharp turn and you're trying to maintain as much speed. So that's one spot, and turn 8, I think a few drivers have clipped them. Which, to be fair, it's at the end of straights. I don't think anybody's taking the liberties in that sort of mid section, in the middle of areas or the really windy bits. Just sort of going on to some other elements of this circuit. Sort of that turn 3, 4, and 5. I feel like there's going to be an incident there in the race, just particularly on the first lap. It's 3 switchbacks in a row. It's like someone's going to get pinned. Someone's going to end up getting hit by somebody.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is as well, is like, okay, the straight is straight, obviously. You've got that kind of fairly slow, well, I say slow turn 1, it's not really that slow. I mean, like, the map we've got there almost paints it as like a 90-degree angle, but I don't think it's quite
No, it's not as abrupt. Or at least you can go from the right-hand side to the left, so you are maintaining a lot.
Yeah, you can kind of sweep through, can't you? So you can kind of go deep-ish into turn 1 and then kind of bring yourself back around for turn 2. So yeah, and I feel like at that point you're still going fairly quick, and obviously at the start everyone's kind of bunched together. So yeah, I feel like 3, 4, particularly 5 as well. That becomes a bit of a pinch point then, doesn't it?
Yeah. I do also like.
Yeah, I guess.
Go on. You carry on with that.
Well, I mean, I guess that is good in one sense because it kind of balance out, the kind of, almost all of Sector 2 and then part of Sector 3 as well, which are almost just straight, like completely straight. So.
Well, Sector 3, I think, is probably one of the more challenging sectors for gaining time, in a sense, because it's not like turns 1, sectors 1 and 2, where you are just going to the extremities of the track, all the way to the left, all the way to the right, just trying to, maintain as much speed as possible. Sector 3, the driving line, or the most optimum for the speed, is sometimes right in the centre of the track, and trying to find where it is, particularly as they've got some banked turns around there, or slightly banked. You see a lot of the cars, they'll be like, well, you'd be wondering, why on earth are they taking that line? And it's like, because the quickest line is in the centre of the track, which just seems very strange for something. So I feel like it's going to be... Yeah, it's going to be...
It's quite unique, isn't it? As in, like, I guess the default is either kind of start wide, cut across the corner, and then run wide again. So you're kind of almost cutting across the corner. But like you said, it's not
like that in that
very often that you have like a corner where the optimal line is through the middle. And I guess... in some ways it makes it interesting because then there's space on the inside and the outside for the cars behind. Do you risk chucking your car up the inside on the potentially the...
Well, it's a good overtaking spot now, isn't it? You know what I mean? That's...
Yeah, exactly.
Drivers who would take the most optimal line usually are going to be getting cut up by drivers who aren't, just so they can get ahead. And it's like, that balance. Because then also you got to think that the driver in front will then go, well, I'll block off that sort of place where they can undercut me, but at the same time the other driver's then gaining time on them because they can take the most optimal route. It's going to be a really fine balance, particularly in the race heading into a DRS sector, which is the final straight. Well,
I was about to ask, is that DRS zone activation point or detection, I should say, is that further back than it has been in the past? Do we know?
I do not know if it is, but I am surprised it is as far back as it is, because for those who haven't got the map, it's before turn 14, which is before turn 15, which is before the straight. So there's 2 turns effectively before the actual DRS zone is where the detection zone is. But I can understand why it's sort of there, because you are maintaining a lot of speed around that corner. And I guess, do you really want to have a detection zone right before the turn, which is before the straight, where you find people just, in a sense, driving overly quick, braking really sharp, and then the compromise going into that straight where, you know what I mean, by having it a little bit earlier, perhaps then it allows drivers to correct and be able to actually go at that DRS at a correct angle and
Well,
overtaken.
As a result, it means that kind of turns 11, 12 and 13, I know this sounds like a little bit of a dull statement, but because of the nature of the corners is kind of a fairly important sector then in terms of obtaining the DRS, because it's kind of sweeping, you have really got to be on the money in terms of where you're putting the car to ensure that you get DRS from the car in front heading into turn 14.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's gonna. I think Sector 3 that is where the qualifying times are going to be made and lost. I mean, obviously, certain teams won't be able to compete, particularly through Sector 2, where it's all straight. Yeah. But if when you're talking,
the top teams, I think.
Mercedes and Red Bull, it's going to be decided on Sector 3, I think, for sure.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that.
Well, what are your thoughts on the circuit in general? Do you like it? Would you like to see it remain in F1 going into next season?
I mean, to be honest with you, like I said earlier, I've always been a little bit indifferent to the circuit in France. To be honest, I don't know, just because I think in my head I'd always seen it as like quite a straight circuit, and again, dull statement. There are lots of straights, but then obviously Sector 3 is a bit mixes it up, and kind of the end of Sector 1 as well. So there is a bit going on. I think it definitely benefits from having had the 2 street circuits immediately before it, because you're kind of going from, and again, I know Baku has like a lot of straights, but it's kind of stop-start, isn't it? It's like you do a straight and then you have a nice
there's no sweeping bends.
And you do another straight, and then exactly. Whereas this one, it kind of flows a little bit better. So I'm quite looking forward to it, to be honest.
Yeah, should be good.
Yeah. I think it's definitely got its place in the calendar. I think. Like I said, I think it certainly benefits from having had the 2 street circuits before, because you're kind of getting extremities, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Going on to the sort of drivers, in a sense, and what we think is going to be happening in the race. Red Bull do seem to have been a few steps ahead of Mercedes in the 2 street circuits we've just had. Yeah. With the circuit sort of being have longer straights and more of them, do you think, and also high-speed corners for that matter, do you think Mercedes will sort of be in a better shot of winning this race? Because they have been quite drastically out of the races in the other 2.
I think so. I mean, I'm not saying that Mercedes are going to walk away with it. I don't think that's going to happen for the rest of the season. But, I don't know, like when you look at the races we've had so far, as in Bahrain, it was close between Mercedes. As in, I would have said that Bahrain was fairly even in terms of, the speed of the cars. Imola, Mercedes did better. Spain was fairly close again, but I think Mercedes just about edged it. I think it's been pretty clear that the street circuits, the Red Bull is much better than the Mercedes. So I think it'll be more balanced then, let's put it that way.
Fair enough.
As in, I think looking at Azerbaijan, you were looking at some of the practice sessions. I think at one point Mercedes were 12 and 16 in practice, and you were looking at it and going, oh my goodness, like that's rough. But,
so do you think Mercedes will just sort of get back onto a level pegging rather than being quicker than the Red Bull this weekend?
Maybe marginally quicker, but not, as in I don't think we're going to be like Mercedes of last season who just kind of like 30 seconds ahead kind of scenario.
Fair.
I think it's just a case that perhaps it'll be more level pegging, Mercedes slightly quicker. And as a result then, I think in the street circuits they've had to do things with strategy that they wouldn't normally do in order to try and place themselves in a good position. Like, for example, in qualifying, they basically sacrificed Bottas, didn't they? Yeah. Poor bloke. Just so they could get Hamilton on the front row. Like they gave him in tow, didn't they? So, I don't think you're going to be seeing that sort of scenario again, because I think they were doing that literally just to be like within distance of Red Bull, not just because Red Bull was so dominant at the street circuits. But I don't think we're going to be seeing that again. I hope I'm not made to eat my words on that one, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Fair.
And I guess the thing is as well, because it's quite a fast sweep-in circuit, I think that probably would favour the Mercedes over the Red Bull. I think the Red Bull has probably got better downforce in perhaps the slower corners, whereas Mercedes have the I think they have the slight power advantage with the unit. Not as much as they have done in the past, obviously. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
Obviously, Perez won in Azerbaijan. Good for him. Do you think this will be more the same, or do you think Bottas will... I know you're saying the Mercedes will be quicker in a sense, but now that Perez seems to have properly gotten to grips with his car, I mean, arguably, you could have said he was faster than Verstappen outright. It was just the pure fact that he had a slower pit stop, which is the reason he was behind. Do you think with him finally getting to grips with this car that this could be another 2 Red Bulls towards the front and just one Mercedes battling with them, or do you see Bottas sort of being a little bit more in the conversation now that we are out of the street circuits? Or is Bottas just rubbish still?
I mean, the thing is, I think definitely with Perez, we've had, like last race was a very convincing performance. He's had a few unfortunate things with tyre failure. Sorry, I can't speak right now. He had an issue at Bahrain, didn't he? We had a problem with his car, so he had to start from the pit lane. He had a bit of a stinker at Imola. I mean, I think that race was important for Perez, really, to kind of put himself in that kind of like, I'm here sort of scenario, as in he's got a podium. And like you said, had it not been for a slightly dodgy pit stop, you could argue that he possibly would have been first anyway. Bottas really needs a good performance, as in the guy has been quite unlucky, but I don't know. He could, to be honest with you, I feel like Bottas could probably do with winning a race fairly soon.
Yeah, I think that would
just
help.
Just because it's... Yeah, I know, again, a dull statement, I know, but in terms of his confidence, because it must be shot at the moment. And, perhaps what we're seeing now is that Bottas has been shown up when he's not got, by far, the best car. And I guess this is going back to what we've said previously, like we've said, should he be replaced, etc., etc. They're better drivers there, and the argument would have always been, well, if Hamilton's winning and Bottas is finishing second, ultimately, can you really ask for much more?
No.
But now that Mercedes haven't got the most dominant car, and I think Baku, you can probably write that off just purely on the basis that Mercedes effectively just sacrificed him in final qualifying just to get Hamilton in a good position.
And Monaco, they decided to shred his wheel. So, he has been unlucky.
Yeah. He has had a few unlucky ones, but then equally, when there have been times where he could have had a good performance, he hasn't. So, I can't remember which race it was, but he just got stuck. I think it might have been Imola, actually. He just got stuck behind a car for it. Well, and he was fighting for position with George Russell.
Yeah.
Well,
do you think, speaking of George Russell, do you think he could potentially be a mid-season swap with, well, I don't know about with Bottas,
no.
but you don't think Mercedes would take drastic measures if they were like...
No, I don't think Mercedes would do that. Like, if you look at how things go as well, generally, the only team that ever seemed to do a mid-season swap is Red Bull. Mm-hmm. No other teams have really done a mid-season swap. Not in recent years, anyway, unless, there's been, like... driver injury or something like that, or like a driver's had COVID or whatever. Like, generally driver swaps don't happen mid-season, so I don't think, and I just don't see what the benefit would be in terms of,
well, they need to
that's
finish
not
first.
Going to help. Well, they do need to finish first, but I don't think chucking George Russell into the car is going to be, and like ultimately then what do you do? I just don't see what I don't see them doing it, to be honest with you. That's not how Mercedes roll. I think they would sooner stick with him for the rest of the season and then switch it up.
I think that's passive by them, if I'm honest. I think they should. I just can't see the logic in maintaining with Bottas with how poor he's performing. I know he gets the odd raceways towards the front, but that's the thing. We look at those sparks where he's towards the front and we go, there's optimism. But that's the thing, they're just sparks. There's no consistent finishing in the front. It's always 10th, 10th, you know what I mean? It's nothing in between. It's never sort of coming from behind to overtake a few. I mean, you think of Hamilton, was it No, it wasn't Portimao. Whichever circuit it was where he went off. I always lost on the sort of middle of middle of the season ones. I'm not sure what circuit it is, but when he went off, managed to get that red flag because of the Bottas incident. He then managed managed to fight his way through all the way up to second, and Bottas was in 10th that entire time, and he never overtook anybody. And you know what I mean? It's like you're just seeing those other drivers who've had good. I mean, you think of Vettel and Perez; they've started suboptimally in qualifying, and then managed to salvage a podium on quite a few occasions. But Bottas just does not seem to have that in him.
I agree with you, but what you got to remember is at Imola as well, when by the time Hamilton was starting to overtake people, he did have DRS, whereas Bottas was doing it on a slightly damp circuit, so DRS hadn't been enabled.
Okay.
So I think that there is that to consider. And if, for example, Mercedes did do the swap now, and then George Russell comes in, and then he really struggles, what do you do then? Like, do you go back to Bottas? Do you stick with George Russell? I mean, this is...
I get what you're saying, but how much worse can
that...
Russell be, in a sense? Because Bottas isn't picking up anything, really, at the moment. I know that some of them's due to unfortunate circumstances, but by and large, Bottas isn't getting them anything, really, of value for this Constructors' Championship. So I don't... Even if it doesn't work, whether you stick... I'd much rather be in a situation where I'm sticking with Russell, being as he's a young driver who, by and large, has shown a lot of promise and, you know, could end up being a good one, than just sticking with Bottas for the sake of it when you know... I mean, I don't think it's a hidden fact that he's probably not going to be there next year and Russell's going to be in that seat. I don't see the harm, in a sense, in doing it now, because even if you find out then that Russell isn't great, it's like, at least for next season, you know where you're going. Whilst if you stick with Bottas for this one, then you go to Russell and he's rubbish in that one, it's like, well, that's 2 seasons down the drain.
Well... But then again, you know, I think there are other things to consider as well. Like, for example, okay, I know it was unfortunate how it ended up for Hamilton, but there's the potential that Mercedes could have got a win last week. I keep saying last race. With George Russell being the driver as he is, would he have quite happily just provided Hamilton with that toe in the final qualifying session and effectively sacrificed himself?
I'll be honest,
sure
as a second driver, I can understand that. I think it wouldn't be hidden that Russell would be the second driver in that scenario. So I think he'd have to sort of take it on the chin, that one. But in a sense, I don't think Mercedes just sacrificed Bottas. They did intend to do him on the second run, but were just unfortunate there was a red flag. So I feel like they'd still give both drivers an opportunity to do well. I just think obviously Hamilton would get the preferential treatment for, you know, scenarios where you think a red flag may be coming out, for instance. Yeah.
I just think partway through the season, I feel like this is quite high risk, I think. And like for me, you know, Red Bull did it, and look how that turned out for them. With, you know, Gasly's getting better results in the Alpha. And the thing is, you know, Red Bull do it, but they have the benefit of having a sister team where they can just swap people willy-nilly. Mercedes don't have that benefit. I know they can do it with George Russell because he's, you know, managed by Toto Wolff. But after that, anyone that Mercedes want to get in, realistically, they're going to have to go and do it like any other team would.
No,
so I think it is a slightly different scenario.
That's true. But to be honest, though, I think even though it would be inconvenient, I wouldn't be surprised if some drivers, I mean, you said Gasly, for instance, if Mercedes came a knocking, I'm sure he'd go, yeah, I'm off. You know what I mean? I know, yeah. I think there's still options there. But the longer you leave it, those options, I mean, you think of Ocon, he just got a 3-year extension at Alpine this week. So, you know what I mean? Drivers get snapped up, in a sense, to long-term deals, and who knows? AlphaTauri could say to Gasly, unless you sign with us now for a long period, we're not going to stick with you, in a sense, because you want that bit of security about them. But yeah, these are sort of down the line issues, I imagine.
Yeah,
for sure. Sort of going back a little bit in the pack, Leclerc for Ferrari says he expects it to be a sort of back to reality race, this one, after 2 consecutive poles for him. What do you think they can be at all as competitive without the sort of street circuit, but also the fact that these straights, there's so many of them and they're so long?
Well, I think it will be back to reality, to be honest. I mean, you only have to look at Azerbaijan last week. I keep saying that, last race.
I forgive you.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it. You only have to look at Azerbaijan last race, as in, I think I was certainly surprised. I think you were surprised as well at how quickly Leclerc basically just got driven past. I think it was without DRS as well that Hamilton got him, wasn't it? So, you know, I think I think it may be a bit of a back down to earth with a bump for Ferrari. I don't really know what else to say in relation to that. To be honest, I think like when you look at how pole happened in Monaco, okay, like Leclerc had the fastest time at the point he crashed, but Verstappen was still to go. So you'd assume that had Leclerc not crashed, he would have got pole at Monaco, Verstappen. And last time around, Leclerc was very fortunate to have had a tow from both Hamilton and Bottas. So I feel like there's an element to which, not artificial, because obviously the Ferraris were still quick, but I think the pole positions flattered them a little bit relative to the pace of the car.
That's fair enough.
So I think that this, like I said, this race may be a bit of a back down to earth with a bump. What are your thoughts?
I do agree. I don't think Ferrari will be anywhere near challenging for quali or the race this week. I'll be honest, I would be surprised to see them go behind both the McLarens and the AlphaTauris. Just think the AlphaTauri have finally figured out what they're doing with Gasly in terms of strategy rather than putting him on suboptimal plans. So, I see Ferrari falling back.
Fair enough.
Speaking of McLaren, they did sort of fall off the pace a touch. I know Norris got a third in Monaco, but I mean Danny Rick finished 12th and 9th in the two races previously, so they're not quite firing on all cylinders as they were previously. Do you think that's the case of it just being the street circuit factor, or do you think, in a sense, Ferrari and AlphaTauri have sort of caught up to them in terms of pace and street smarts in a way?
Well, I don't really know, to be honest, because obviously Danny Rick has been struggling all season anyway. So it's tricky to say. I mean, I guess with the street circuit, I feel like qualifying is so important. As in if you don't qualify well, then generally, unless you have an outstanding performance or you have a little bit of luck or your strategy pulls it out of the bag, you are gonna be struggling. I don't think there's a lot of opportunity for natural overtaking. AlphaTauri seem to, like you said, they seem to have got their act together a little bit. But I don't know whether they are at the, as in this time around, when you've got a lot of straights, as in McLaren have the Mercedes power unit, which, although not perhaps as dominant as it has been in past seasons, is still, I would say, slightly the better power unit to be running. Is that going to pay dividends in terms of the fast straight, the long straights and the fast corners? But then, as in AlphaTauri really seem to have pulled it together, so perhaps they're more level pegging than they certainly have been up to this point in the season. I think it's probably more a case that AlphaTauri have caught up rather than McLaren have regressed.
Fair enough.
And like I said, I feel like with Ricciardo, I think it's more a case that that's kind of where he's been finishing all season anyway. So I think the only one you're really looking out for is Norris, to see where he kind of slots in now. Does he kind of pick up from where he left off prior to the the street circuit, or does he kind of stay where he is? In which case, I think you could truly say that AlphaTauri have caught them up.
That's fair enough. You did mention Danny Rick there, not doing particularly well. Tsunoda's probably another who, despite having a little bit of promise at the beginning, hasn't quite delivered the bacon for AlphaTauri as of yet. I mean, he now sits only above the Alfa Romeo, Haas and Williams drivers in the standings, which isn't really a good spot to be in when your teammate's so much further up the rankings or standings. Do you think, I mean, we know the sort of relentless nature of the Red Bull teams. Do you think, I forget his name, the guy who runs Red Bull, not Horner, but the Markle?
Helmut
Marko. Do you reckon he's going to be quite forgiving with Tsunoda in a sense, or do you think he's going to be expecting a little bit better results from him so far?
I think you've got to give a little bit of leeway because it's his first year in Formula One. I think the thing that doesn't help Tsunoda is that he seems to, and it's funny, like when I'm pretty sure, like when he got his good results in the first couple of races, like I said, he seems like he knows, like, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what I said, but nowadays, like, Tsunoda just seems to kick off a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I think he just needs, and that seems to be part of his character, I think he just needs to perhaps just chill out a little bit. Because, yeah, I don't know, I think you've got to give him, a little, like I said, a little bit of leeway. And, yeah, I don't know, I'll be honest with you, I mean, I feel like there is an element to which I feel like Gasly is probably exceeding expectations with the car that he's got, rather than that is where AlphaTauri are at, to be honest. Like,
Okay.
realistically, you would never expect an AlphaTauri to be on the podium. And I know there were exceptional circumstances, but you know, McLaren will be looking at that and kind of saying, well, that's not how it should be. Again, Ferrari, you'd probably be looking at that and going, right, that's where we kind of need to be. And as good as the AlphaTauri as a car is, I think that Gasly is exceeding expectations, which I think as a result then kind of paints Tsunoda in a slightly less positive light. You know, because, you know, like you've said, realistically AlphaTauri are ahead of Alfa, Haas and Williams. You know, would you have them ahead of Aston Martin and Renault on outright pace?
Yeah.
I'm not sure you would, potentially.
I said yeah.
Oh, you would?
Yeah,
would you?
I would. But yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's something about the car. I think it's flying. I do. Just, yeah, I think it's a really good car. I think being the sister team of Red Bull helps. And I think the Honda Power Unit is paying dividends in a sense. I think it's quicker than the Renault. And I don't think Aston Martin have the technical savvy to make a car quick enough to compete. You know what I mean? Their entire performance is based on what parts they buy from Mercedes and what minor tweaks they can make, because they are a decent team, they have been, but I feel like there's a little bit of an over-dependency on Mercedes now in regards to what they do. I mean, you sort of give up some of your, I don't know what the right term here is, but when you're not building your own parts, you know, for everything, rather than just just the engine, which you weren't doing. In a sense, you lose the sort of ability to edit things because you don't 100% understand how things work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of AlphaTauri, if you imagine that, you know, Gasly had stayed at Red Bull, and then AlphaTauri's potential partnership would have been Albon and Tsunoda.
Yeah, that's not quite
to
as
me
promising.
then.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
No, that's what I mean. I'm not saying that it's all because of Gasly, but I feel like that combo of Gasly and a pretty good car relative to where they should be, I think that kind of inflates how good AlphaTauri are as a team, perhaps a little bit.
How good would you say Gasly is in terms of, not saying it to rank all of the drivers now, but I'm assuming you're putting Verstappen and Hamilton as a top two, and where you sort of fitting Gasly in amongst that sort of Norris, Leclerc, Sainz, Ricciardo sort of equation?
Well,
or even other drivers.
I mean, it's difficult to say. It's difficult to say, isn't it? Because again, for as good as AlphaTauri were at Azerbaijan, they have had some stinkers this season.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, is it a case that that's because of the car, or is that because the drivers made a mistake, etc., etc.? So, I mean, if you're looking in terms of that, you know, like the younger drivers on the grid, like if you're looking at Norris, Tsunoda, George Russell, and then you include Gasly in that. I mean, you'd have to have Gasly probably as the top. Probably the top driver in that little group of drivers, wouldn't you? You know, as good as Norris has been, like,
he's in a McLaren.
Ultimately, he's with McLaren, so you'd expect him to
She's
be
saying
better,
Gasly's the third best driver, you think, of the circuit?
Oh, I wouldn't say he's the third best driver. I think that's a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I think you'd probably have Sergio Perez out of him, wouldn't you?
Oh, really?
Yeah, I would say so.
I think Perez has attributes which make him good in a sense he can maintain his entire life, but I think if someone were giving me a driver for outright pace, I think I'm probably more inclined to sway towards the Gasly persuasion. But that might just be...
But then, you know, we did say that Perez probably would have been
finished
first outright last race had it not been for
Yeah, but he's in the Red Bull.
slightly dodgy pit
I
stop.
think that's all the Red Bull I do.
Oh, was it? Oh.
Maybe not all, but...
But then he was quicker than. But then he was quicker than Verstappen.
Yeah.
So-
Well, yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, I'm contradicting myself now, aren't I? Oh, it's a tricky one.
That you are.
Truth be
my
told,
boy.
though, if I were making a team right now, I'd probably be looking at Verstappen and Gasly as two drivers I'd want headlining it.
Well,
I'd like Hamilton,
I mean,
but he's
Red
a bit
Bull did
old.
have that, and then they shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
So
That is not ideal for them.
I still don't understand that decision. I'll be honest.
It was too brash.
Anyway,
Too brash.
very brash. Very brash.
Yeah, leaving that sort of conversation aside, and just looking at Vettel, really. I mean, he's managed. I think I've put in you that he had the most overtakes in both races, the last two races, but that isn't true. I think Perez got more in Monaco, but I think he had the second most in Monaco at the very least. But I think he finished 6th and then 2nd last week. He's had 2 phenomenal races in a row. Do you think that's all down to strategy, or do you think the Aston Martin has turned a corner in terms of its performance?
I wouldn't say it's solely down to strategy. I mean, Vettel has been...
I mean, both times, to be fair, they have opted for the let's start on the harder tyre and go longer, and then... You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, obviously it plays a part, doesn't it? But, you know, I think... I don't know, I just fancy Vettel has looked a little bit more comfortable in the car in the past couple of races. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens now, again, that we're at a more kind of traditional Formula 1 scenario, I guess, in terms of it, rather than it being a street circuit, you know, on a designated track rather than just streets. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. But, you know, I think Vettel has looked more comfortable. I think, you know, when you compare him to Stroll, his teammates, you know, I think whereas at the start of the season you would have had Stroll ahead, I feel like now it's probably about 50-50 in terms of driver performance. So I think Vettel has definitely stepped his game up. Yeah, who knows whether they can maintain it. We'll have to wait and see on that one, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Shall we move on to some predictions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, well, the scores before Azerbaijan, I know we've sort of let this slide a touch, but it was 14 to me and 15 to you. At Azerbaijan, we both incorrectly guessed the winner and pole, so there's no points awarded there. And then for overtakes, I put Leclerc, who lost 3 positions, and you put Alonso, who gained 2. So the new standings are I'm on 11 and you were on 17. Which is there we go. Well, in a sense, because we seem to be rubbish at doing the winner and the pole, because I don't think we've had it for 4 consecutive weeks now. I thought let's change it up a touch. Instead of doing a winner, we're going to do a top 3. If you get any of the correct drivers, well, not any. For every correct driver you get is a point. If you get that driver in the correct position, it's 3 points for that in particular driver.
Oh, right, okay. So, like, if you said Hamilton was on pole and then he comes third, you still get a point?
Yes. So, for instance,
Okay.
I'm predicting for this race, it's going to be Verstappen first, Hamilton second, Perez third. If it ended up that Verstappen won, then Hamilton was third and Perez was second, I'd get 3 points for the Verstappen pick and just 1 point each for the Hamilton and the Perez, because they were both in the top 3, but they were in the incorrect position. That is my pick for the top 3. Verstappen first, Hamilton second, Perez third. What is yours?
Mine is Hamilton first. I'm back in Bottas now.
Ooh.
Putting my money where my mouth is. And then Verstappen third.
Fair. You think Mercedes are
I
going
don't
to have
know,
a little
I
bit
just
of a come up for the books?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I'm just saying that in the hope that Bottas isn't horrendously unlucky again. Because the guy, the past 2 races, has just been thrown to the wolves a little bit, I think.
I think this is the 3rd time that you're going to have picked the same pole sitter. I don't know if you were aware of that.
Is it?
I think this is the 3rd time you've said this individual. Who are you putting for pole?
Bottas.
Doing Bottas, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is your 3rd
I'm doing
one,
it.
yeah.
I'm going to say it just purely because in hope that he gets pole.
I got a feeling.
Just for his own confidence.
I got a feeling the other 2 times you've put him at pole were the ones where he crashed out with Russell and last week where he finished 10th. But
all right.
I'll be honest, I'm not as good because I've just put Verstappen every week and somehow he's managed to escape first position on the qualifying each time. I am going Verstappen again. It's got to happen at some point.
Okay.
And who are you putting for overtakes? One of the big differentiators so far.
I'm putting Vettel.
That's fair. He's had 2 good ones in a row, and I'm going to go for Perez, who's perhaps just outdone him for the last 2 races. But should be interesting to see what happens.
We shall wait and see. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. So thank you very much for listening. As always, if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, why not give us a follow or subscribe? As we said, there's going to be a lot of stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks. I think we're also going to be doing a Tour de France episode as well.
That is correct.
We should be joined by a guest for that, so you'll have to wait and see who that is. As always, we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Breaker, Pocket Casts. I think that's all of them. Jack, pleasure as always, and we shall speak to you all soon.